Right, so an attempt, it appears, has been made on the life of Benjamin Netanyahu, but should we honestly be surprised at this by this point? This is the guy who has been behind moves to take out the leaders of other regimes and movements, and he hasn't finished yet. Now, with Iran not only being blamed for the assassination attempt on him, but threats against their leadership now as well. Why is it such a shock that those who have had their leaders attacked would consider Netanyahu himself now, therefore, a legitimate target at this point? And that is aside from what appears to be an increasingly broader consensus that there can't actually be a peace whilst this guy is still Prime Minister of Israel, and there appears to be little sign of any real chance of removing him anytime soon. By targeting other leaders and continuing the rhetoric of consequences for other leaderships across the Middle East, Netanyahu has painted a target on himself, and the question now hanging in the air is whether or not any more attempts on his life are going to follow. Right, so Benjamin Netanyahu has had an attempt made against his life. A drone strike on his holiday home in Caesarea, a beach resort area some 60 kilometres north of Tel Aviv. Must be nice that he can get away from it all at a time like this and relax still, it seems. But putting him closer to the Lebanese border as that does too, so we shouldn't probably be too surprised that a Lebanese drone strike was made against him after all. He's taken out several of their leadership and several likely successors as well, so in what way would Netanyahu not have painted a target on himself as a result of that? The assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, as well as several other high-profile Hezbollah figures, not to mention the literal invasion of southern Lebanon by the IDF, has led to increased strikes in retaliation by Lebanon, has led to standoffs with the UN peacekeepers protecting their border region area, UNIFIL, from Indonesian members of those forces being knocked from watchtowers to Irish peacekeepers being used as human shields whilst Israeli tanks pummel Lebanese villages below from their vantage points, their outposts. Today, Israel are being caught using white phosphorus near UNIFIL outposts, causing fires which cannot be put out easily, and of course committing a war crime with this beastly incendiary which is banned from use against civilian areas, but which never seems to stop Israel doing so. All in all, with their leaderships attacked, Hezbollah, not in any way it appears to have been slowed by that either for that matter though, who will put it past them or others to strike at Netanyahu himself? It obviously isn't just Hezbollah's leadership that have been assassinated either, of course. The targeting of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran back in July prompted a retaliation from Iran for this attack in their capital, completely derailing ceasefire talks and peace negotiations as Haniyeh was the Hamas head negotiator as well as co-leader. This left Hamas under the leadership of the more militant Yahya Sinwar, now also dead, as the IDF happened upon him by accident fighting in Rafah, but making the mistake of showing exactly what the Hamas leader was doing, and defiant to his last breath, hurling a stick at a drone before tank fire made sure he didn't move again. That's three major players, major leaders opposing Israel's genocide of Gaza and invasion of Lebanon that have been taken out by the Israeli regime, and they celebrate and they cheer, not least Netanyahu himself doing so. This is par for the course for Israel, though. It is a tactic they've always employed. Not unique to them, but when they've got a Wikipedia page dedicated to assassinations they either have or have been alleged to have carried out that is as long as your arm, going all the way back to the 1950s, though, it does count for something. That does really say something, doesn't it? And according to this list, which obviously has links to each entry to a news story which verifies it, it is Wikipedia after all. Let's not just assume it's right, let's do the due diligence as well. But since Haniyeh's death at the end of July, and aside from Nasrallah and Sinwar's deaths since, Israel have also taken out the head of Hezbollah's Radwan Special Ops Force, their commander of their missile and rocket unit, the head of their drone unit, the deputy head of Hezbollah's executive council, and the Hamas commander in Lebanon. It is a track record of Israel taking out leaders of opposing forces, and now that same tactic has been revisited upon them, upon their Prime Minister, Netanyahu, especially given the assassination of Yahya Sinwar has been such a massive propaganda failure for Israel. That he went down fighting and was filmed doing so will reinvigorate and encourage those who fought with him, or against Israel at any rate, rather than how these leaders so often get portrayed as hiding in bunkers or accused of using hostages as human shields. It simply turns out to be more Israeli lies and nonsense, and that video footage of Sinwar's last stand has for many proven that beyond doubt now. What they celebrated was short-lived, because then came that strike on Netanyahu's house. The drone, despite Hezbollah's head of their drone unit having been assassinated, hasn't, it appears, stopped the drone still coming from Lebanon. And this drone found its mark. Again, the Israeli air defences have failed. Netanyahu not at home as it happened, though. It tickled me slightly to discover that Netanyahu lives in Caesarea, though, as for those of you who have a passing knowledge of Bible studies and or Middle Eastern history, might note that the modern town of Caesarea is built just to the north of the ancient seaport of Caesarea Maritima, where the local chap in charge once upon a time, around the time a certain chap called Jesus Christ was born, just happened to be Herod the Great. And, well, we all know what he did, don't we? The resemblance or attitude Netanyahu displays makes you wonder whether it's something in the water or some such, doesn't it? And where Herod was handed that land by the Roman Empire, of course, puppet king as he was, modern Israel, the land they occupied, well, handed to them by the British Empire, of course. Though I suppose the difference is that the West has very much lost control of Israel's leadership, unlike the Romans. Anyway, I've digressed at this point, haven't I? Netanyahu not being at home. Well, what was he then? Well, he might have been at work, pressing the flesh somewhere with someone, but the optics of the strike on Sinwar versus this strike on Netanyahu's home has damaged the propaganda war Israel is trying to win even further, because where Sinwar was seen and filmed to go down fighting as he was, Netanyahu not being home, well, begs the question, was he instead hiding then? In fact, if it wasn't being so widely reported in foreign media, at least, that this drone strike definitely came from Lebanon, I wouldn't put it past Netanyahu having set this up as a precursor to continuing his war now against Lebanon, as the strike had come against him personally, and of course Western leaders would breathe a sigh of relief as they can also use this excuse to keep arming Israel, despite their growing expansion of this Middle East conflict, because we're led by complete donkeys in the West, are we not? Still jumping to Israel's tune. Well, with the general public both out in the Middle East and domestically, this is not going to wash. Netanyahu has come out all bolshy about it, hasn't he? And this is where his next mistake has come from. And a lot of the rhetoric supporting him implies more leaderships of opposing Middle Eastern states are likely to be targeted next, not learning, it seems, from the fact he's been targeted himself. Because where Hezbollah have had their leadership blown apart, some extent anyway, as an organisation they still seem quite functional given they're still fighting, it was notable that it wasn't Lebanon or Hezbollah that Netanyahu pointed the finger of blame at for this drone strike, for making a fatal mistake, as he put it, against him. It was Iran he accused of it. Now, we know Israel are determined to push ahead with another attack on Iran, and this strike against Netanyahu is also being used to gather support for that now. Hezbollah, the Iranian proxies, as they are always called in the media, as opposed to the Axis of Resistance, as they actually tend to prefer to be called. Resisting Israel as that is, resisting those supporting them as well. Allegedly, the US have tempered Israel to not attack certain targets, but will Ayatollah Khomeini now be one of these targets as a result of this strike on Netanyahu's home? In a lot of ways, the attack on Netanyahu's house, whilst he wasn't there, means he can point and accuse even if people aren't buying the snake oil he's selling. Though certainly others are, and bigging up the blaming of Iran too on social media, as Zionists will. As I said, if not for the reports I've seen on this strike, I could quite easily believe that Netanyahu organised this himself to justify pushing onwards. But it means he's missing the point here as well. That if he's determined to keep striking other leaders, then he's going to be painting a bigger and bigger target on himself as a result, as a leader himself as well. And if he thinks he's untouchable, the house strike finding its mark ought to have told him otherwise, really. By blaming Iran and not Lebanon, though, it was just a drone after all, not a high-tech missile, as Iran might more likely have been given to Lebanon and to Israel, to Hezbollah, Netanyahu is fighting to find a justification to continue his war in the Middle East, but missing the point that he is now, it seems, very much a target himself. And by twisting this event to his cause, again doing the total opposite to working towards a cessation of warfare and working towards a ceasefire and lasting peace, as our leaders keep telling us they are, and that he must be because they're talking with him and he's their ally, it's obvious to all of us again he has no intention of stopping. He's justified it to himself. He's given the justification for Western leaders to now continue their support for him and his warfare. But he's fooling nobody in the court of public opinion, both in the West and in the Middle East, and he's just becoming a bigger target himself for his enemies, more of a global pariah to most people, the more he insists that this war of his has to continue. A war that is functionally only being committed to keep him in his post. The consequences of the death of Yahya Sinwar run much deeper than this video has covered. I covered it here instead, actually. His death actually proving to be a complete nightmare for the West, notably. And again, the timing of this attack on Netanyahu, oh so convenient. Frankly, I could still believe he set it up if it suddenly came out as such. But find out why this is such a major issue for Western leaders, particularly now, in this video recommendation here, as your suggested next watch. They needn't celebrate too soon at all, quite frankly. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.